Who is the Democratic Party? The Democratic Party has a long and storied history in the United States. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the Democratic Party in the southern states was dominated by conservative white politicians who promoted segregationist policies and racial discrimination. This era was marked by the Jim Crow laws, which enforced racial segregation in public facilities and various other forms of systemic racism. This is the party that included members affiliated with the Ku Klux Klan, KKK, that embraced denying Black Americans and other minorities their civil rights. The Ku Klux Klan, founded in 1865, was a white supremacist terrorist organization that aimed to maintain white supremacy in the South after the Civil War and Reconstruction. The KKK had a significant presence in several states and was involved in acts of violence, intimidation, and terror against African Americans and other minority groups. Franklin D. Roosevelt and the New Deal. A turning point for the Democratic Party began during the presidency of Franklin D. Roosevelt in the 1930s. The New Deal, a series of economic and social reforms aimed at addressing the Great Depression, helped establish a stronger federal government and increased support for the Democratic Party among African Americans. FDR's coalition-building efforts included reaching out to minority communities and creating programs like the Works Progress Administration, WPA, that provided jobs and economic relief to millions, regardless of race. While the New Deal did not entirely eliminate racial discrimination, it marked a shift in the Democratic Party's approach toward civil rights. Many American Jews felt a connection to these values because of their own history of facing discrimination and persecution. As a result, they aligned themselves with the Democratic Party that promoted social and economic inclusivity, which continues to today. The Truman administration's recognition of Israel as a sovereign state, shortly after it declared independence in 1948, solidified the Jewish vote. His support for Israel endeared him to many Jewish Americans who saw him as a friend to their cause. Post-World War II and the Civil Rights Movement. The transformative moment for the Democratic Party's stance on civil rights came during and after World War II. African Americans had served their country in the war effort, and the stark contrast between the fight for democracy abroad and the lack of civil rights at home became evident. The civil rights movement gained momentum in the 1950s and 1960s, with activists and leaders advocating for racial equality and an end to segregation. Democratic President Lyndon B. Johnson played a crucial role in passing significant civil rights legislation during his presidency. In 1964, he signed the Civil Rights Act, which outlawed segregation and discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. He followed it up with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which aimed to overcome voting barriers that disproportionately affected minority voters. The contemporary Democratic Party. Since the Civil Rights era, the Democratic Party has generally been associated with advocating for civil rights, equal opportunity, and social justice. However, Barack Obama, who served as the 44th President of the United States from 2009 to 2017, advocated the transformation of the country. His administration, rather than bringing the nation together, used the umbrella of the concept of equity over merit and climate change to move the nation to one of dependence, relying on a strong central government, in effect moving a constitutional republic into an administrative state controlled by an elitist central government. This administrative state would exercise significant control over various aspects of public and private life, including the media, freedom of speech, and political dissent. This also started the movement away of the many Black and minority middle-class voters from the Democratic Party who were against these policies and a dependent class as a threat to their hard-won movement into the middle class. Reshaping America. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, is the single largest payer for health care in the United States. In 2021, around 37% of the U.S. population received health insurance through Medicare and Medicaid. Obama's Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, was aimed at increasing access to health care for millions of Americans who were previously uninsured or underinsured. In fact, it pushed more people into dependence on the central government. Remember the promise that if you like your doctor, you can keep him? It turned out to be a false narrative. In effect, it forced people with private insurance onto the government rolls. The demise of private health insurance through cost shifting. Medicare and Medicaid have been traditionally underfunded, leading to cost shifting in the healthcare system. The healthcare providers compensated for the lower reimbursements they receive from these government programs by charging higher rates to private insurers and patients with commercial insurance. Healthcare providers also limited the number of patients they accept from these programs or reduced the services they offer to beneficiaries. Underfunding these programs has resulted in more people being uninsured or underinsured. Obamacare was designed to fill the gap created by government in the first place. Clearly, an attempt to shift 18.3% of gross domestic product to government control and a move to nationalize the healthcare system into a single-payer system controlled by the central government. It's all about control. Energy is a critical input in almost all economic activities, including manufacturing, transportation, agriculture, and services. When energy costs are low, businesses can produce goods and services more cost-effectively, leading to lower production costs. This, in turn, allows companies to be more competitive, maintain higher profit margins, and potentially lower prices for consumers. You control energy, and you control the country. Under the umbrella of climate change, the Obama administration has called for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, implementing regulations to limit carbon emissions from power plants and transportation. Through regulations, they are imposing control over every aspect of our lives. The poor and middle class are mostly impacted by these changes. Removing oil leads to inflation, reduced purchasing power, and overall economic uncertainty. Drastic economic changes lead to social unrest, protests, and political instability. Once again, the central government comes to the aid by providing financial aid and more regulations on a problem that they created, but now forces a large segment of the population to become dependent on government. Weakening the middle class and the poor, Obama advocated for comprehensive immigration reform and open borders, providing a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. The Democratic Party has emphasized values of diversity and inclusion. Party members and supporters view open borders as a way to promote cultural exchange and celebrate the contributions of immigrants to the nation's social fabric. But in fact, open borders raise concerns about national security, the strain on public resources, and the negative impact on wages and job opportunities for domestic workers. Certain industries, such as agriculture, hospitality, construction, and technology, support open borders as they rely on immigrant labor to fill jobs that are so-called difficult to fill with domestic workers and lowers wages. Since the majority of these undocumented immigrants are uneducated and do not speak English, they relying on the central government for support. This makes them ideal candidates for manipulation and control while weakening the middle class. Creating the next generation of 21st century serfs. Obama sought to improve the education system by increasing funding for education, promoting early childhood education, and supporting reforms to improve K-12 schools. The hidden agenda instead was to use education as a tool for controlling the population and maintaining their hold on power. This control was achieved through various means, including curriculum manipulation, propaganda, indoctrination, censorship, and control over educational institutions. Through the Department of Education, they defined what was to be taught in schools by manipulating or rewriting the curriculum to promote their ideologies, suppress dissenting viewpoints, and glorify the regime. History, social studies, and civics lessons were altered to present a skewed version of events that aligns with the government's narrative. Suspending civil rights, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party used havoc in Germany to gain power, dismantle democratic institutions, and suppress opposition parties, leading to the establishment of a totalitarian regime. Obama efforts to address issues of mass incarceration and advocating for criminal justice reforms, such as reducing mandatory minimum sentences, in effect created havoc across the country. The administration's supporting of judges and district attorneys that would not prosecute resulted in the releasing of criminals onto the public. The releasing of low-level offenders without bail or not prosecuting low-value crimes led to an increase in criminal activity. This has undermined public safety and eroded community trust in the justice system. Holding individuals accountable for their actions through prosecution and potential sentencing is an important aspect of deterrence. Not prosecuting crimes undermines the rights and interests of victims. The public has come to perceive that certain groups or demographics are disproportionately benefiting from not being prosecuted for crimes or being released without bail, has led to a sense of injustice and erode trust in the criminal justice system. Biden came to power on the platform of reconciliation and bringing the country together. In fact, he doubled down on the Obama transformation of the country. The Biden administration declared an emergency using the coronavirus to shut down the country, effectively destroying the economy and creating winners and losers. The winners were the rich and politically aligned with the Biden administration. The losers were the middle class who lost their jobs in small businesses. Decent was stifled through the control of the media and fellow travelers. The lockdown resulted in the closure of businesses, reduced consumer spending, and disrupted supply chains, leading to economic downturn and recession. Many people lost their jobs or faced reduced income, exacerbating poverty and inequality. The lockdown was prolonged longer than should be, or not at all. Here again, the administration created the problem. To compensate for this, large sums of money was indiscriminately distributed around the country, causing inflation exceeding 9%. Social isolation, fear, and uncertainty caused by the lockdown led to an increase in mental health problems such as anxiety, depression, and stress. Lack of social interaction and limited access to mental health services exacerbated these issues. School closures disrupted traditional education, affecting students' learning and development. To this day, children's test scores have shown to be lower as a result of the prolonged closure. Even though scientific evidence was shown that children were the least affected by the virus, schools were kept closed. Vulnerable groups, such as the elderly, those with pre-existing health conditions, and low-income communities, were disproportionately affected by sustaining the shutdown. Many non-COVID-19 medical procedures and treatments were postponed or canceled, leading to delayed diagnoses and treatments for various health conditions. This had negative consequences for patient outcomes and overall public health. We are presently experiencing excessive deaths as a result. The next step in control and takeover. Under the Biden administration, the nation went from energy independent to dependent on foreign sources, most not our friends. The first act on becoming president, he canceled the Keystone Pipeline. Gas prices reached over $6 per gallon. Imposed regulation on drilling and leases on government land and water slowed the development on new sources of oil and gas. Government agencies, under the control of the administration, are proposing the ban on gasoline and diesel vehicles after 2035, including bans on any appliance that uses gasoline or natural gas. This includes stoves, heating, air conditioning, or generators. The Biden administration has learned from the coronavirus lockdown that they can impose their will on the nation by establishing a national emergency, this time on climate change, suspending civil rights and suppressing dissent. Creating chaos on the streets, continuing the Obama policies of open borders, suppression of the opposition, and destruction of the law enforcement. The administration hopes to convince the nation that only a strong central government can solve the nation's problems, and to do that, they must give up their civil rights. So who is the Democratic Party of the 21st century? The Democratic Party has become a totalitarian party controlled by elitists and Marxists bent on changing the nation from a constitutional republic into an administrative state. To accomplish this, they have set out to destroy the middle class and making them subservient to the administrative state. A quote attributed to former Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev: "We do not have to invade the United States. We will destroy you from within."